Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm just letting the last couple of people trickle in, but while you're waiting, if you want to, you're welcome to introduce yourself in the chat, or you can just sit for a minute. But I hope everyone's set up in a nice sort of comfortable space for the next hour, and that you're looking forward to getting some support and strategies to manage uncertainty. So before we begin today's session, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting. I recognise that we all might be logging on from different places, but the land we practice from at the centre belongs to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. So we'd like to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their continuing contribution to culture and country. We'd also like to extend our respects and welcome to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples who might be joining us today in the virtual room. We recognise sovereignty was never ceded and that it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So, welcome. My name's Ellie. I'm a provisional psychologist who's currently completing my placement at the Centre of Emotion Focused Practice. So I will be facilitating the webinar this evening and just trying to make sure everything runs smoothly. Fingers crossed. So first on our agenda today is a bit of housekeeping. I'm sure you're all quite familiar with Zoom etiquette after the past couple of years that we've had. But we please just ask that you keep yourself on mute while the psychologists are presenting, just to minimise any background noise or distractions. And so as you know, this session will be recorded. You're welcome to have your cameras on or off, depending on what you're most comfortable with. So the session will begin with a short introduction to the topic in our panel, and then there'll be 3 presentations from our team of psychologists, so each exploring different perspectives and strategies to manage uncertainty. And throughout the webinar, you're welcome to type any questions you have in the chat box. I think in most people's screens that'll be down the bottom, but it could be up the top as well. And then after the presentations are complete, we have some time set aside to answer these questions and any others that might come up about the content. And I just wanted to flag as well, for the sake of privacy and confidentiality, we won't be able to answer specific questions relating to you or your child, but we're very happy to answer more general questions you may have about the content, or how you might be able to apply different strategies to help deal with uncertainty. So I think some introductions are probably in order. Some of you might have accessed our services before or have some connection to the team. Some of you may be completely new. But basically the centre is a private psychology practice in South Yarra, and we have psychologists and counsellors who work with people across the lifespan, so from early childhood to adulthood. And basically we're running the webinar this evening because we noticed we were receiving more and more child and adolescent referrals at the centre. And we also recognise that many families are doing it tough at the moment. So we've sort of been gathering information from parents to figure out how we can better support their families and to improve their wellbeing. Some of you here tonight might even have been part of those conversations or surveys. If that's you, thank you. Yeah, and basically what we found is that there are long wait lists at the moment for services, a bit of difficulty navigating the mental health system. And that meant that a lot of families were struggling to get the support they needed. Many parents didn't really know where to start or who to ask for help. And the topics that really kept coming up were uncertainty and anxiety, which is really not surprising given the many challenges and disruptions that we have and continue to face. So yeah, on the basis of this, we wanted to develop some extra support and resources on these topics, just to build the capacity and skills of parents. And now I'd like to give a brief introduction to our panel of psychologists. We've got a great spread of presenters here with us today, who all come from quite different areas of speciality and interests, and each of them work with clients at different stages. So we'll hopefully get quite a well-rounded perspective and have a bit of something for everyone. So Geoff will be exploring how we as adults or parents may understand and deal with uncertainty. Geoff, would you mind giving us a brief introduction to yourself and the kind of work that you do?
Yeah, sure. I've been practicing for over 20 years as a psychotherapist and a psychologist over 10 years. My previous existence, I was an engineer, did a bit of a midlife crisis change. what I've noticed in my work, especially the last few years, of course, is how uncertainty seems to creep into everything, everyday life. It's actually part of life, I think. And what perhaps the COVID pandemic has shown is brought that into sharper focus. So, yeah, so I've got quite a keen interest in that as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Geoff. That's great. I'm looking forward to hearing the presentation. Yeah, and then next, Julie will be speaking to us about identifying and responding to uncertainty in children. Julie, do you want to give us a bit of background about yourself and your work that you do?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I've been a psychologist for about 1.5 years now. I work with children as young as like 4 or 5, and I also work with adults as well. A lot of my work is also supporting parents as well, because we know with young children, sometimes they might not have the communication skills to let us know what's going on. So I sort of help parents to understand what your child might be experiencing and how we might be able to support them. And so I've noticed that after COVID, there's been I guess a bit of an increase in everyone feeling quite uncertain and anxious, because we were sort of in a situation of about 2 years where we just didn't know what was going on, when we were going back to school, when we're going back to work. And so now we've come out of it, and we're still trying to manage the effects of that. So yeah, I've been helping a lot of people with that. So this was a good opportunity to help even more people.
Yeah, thanks so much, Julie. And then next, Brittany will be presenting about how uncertainty may impact adolescents or teenagers, and then also how parents can sort of approach these topics with their young person. So yeah, Brittany, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yep, sure. Hi, my name's Brittany Keeler. I'm a graduate psychologist, meaning that I have very recently graduated and started working at the Centre for Emotion Focused Practice. I'm quite interested in working with adolescents and teenagers, as well as seeing adult clients, so pretty much anyone 13 up. Yeah, I guess I really like this client group. I just find them really fun to work with. A lot of them do face a lot of anxiety and depression issues, and I really like, I guess, really working very specifically with them as an individual and understanding, the role of the school, the role of friendship, and helping them to communicate to their parents about some of the issues that they're facing. I've also done a bit of work in schools, but yeah, I'm also just a graduate psychologist here as well. So thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, so as you can see, we've got a great spread. I think it's probably time that I pass on to Geoff for his presentation. You ready?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay, you can let the slide down now. Thanks.
Sure.
I like to see everybody. Look, thanks all for coming. It's a hot topic, uncertainty. Like I said in the beginning, especially with the pandemic, which just sort of put into focus the fact that we don't have all control over our lives as much as perhaps we had wished or hoped for. Now, just to let you know, I don't work with children, I work with adults, and you may have all come here, we're trying to get particular things to deal with your children. But like I said, uncertainty affects all of us, and the way we approach it can also help not only ourselves, but also help our children as well. And also just to warn you, I'm probably going to use the word philosopher and existentialism in my talk, and I don't want you to get all, feeling all eyes glazed over, but I'm an existentialist as well. So I'm informed uncertainty through my existential practice, which is how I got into existentialism, actually, because of the interest and keenness of existence and phenomena. Now, uncertainty is a given, we would say, from an existential perspective, is that it's always been here. And it always will be here. It's part of life itself. But of course, we don't notice it that much when things are going fine, right? When things are going to plan, things are going to what we believe should be. And again, what the pandemic did, because of its impact upon us, forced us into coping in ways we haven't coped before. For example, things like just the way we would normally cope with stress were taken away. You couldn't exercise, for example, couldn't meet people or whatever, would have impacted upon us considerably, and often left us feeling sort of floundering and stuck. And that would naturally increase anxiety. We can also call it chaos, suffering. The Buddhists would call this suffering, anxiety and fear. They're all sort of representations of the same thing of uncertainty, the not knowingness of things, okay? So we say this is a given. So it's something we try to get our heads around, that even though we don't like uncertainty, it actually exists in our lives. And so the question is then, if it exists in our lives, how can we live with it rather than necessarily, not have it at all? Now, as we grow up, we learn values and belief systems and worldviews which help us cope with this situation, because we actually can't live in uncertainty. It is just too confronting for us. So we attempt to form controls around this to, keep it out, so to speak, so we can live what we think is a more normal and controlled life. And actually, we do quite well under the circumstances. And I think the last perhaps 30, 40, 50 years, we've done very well in the West, at least, in controlling ourselves. But it's always there. It's there every day. I mean, if I'm driving to work and something goes wrong and I can't do my normal route to work, I'm thrown into a sense of uncertainty. My attempt is then to regain some sense of control. And this is often the thing. We need to try to find control, even though I'm feeling thrown by the situation itself. And it says something about us, of course, whatever's happened to us. So, Ellie, can I have the slide up for how to live with uncertainty, please?
Of course you can.
So what comes to mind is always the thing about acceptance and change. So what I've got here is the Serenity Prayer. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard of it. It's often associated with AA. My understanding, it actually predates that. I think it's the 19th century. But it really encapsulates how we perhaps can deal with uncertainty. So let me just read. I've got God. You don't have to use God. You could just get rid of that. But God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And often this is perhaps the most important part, because we will attempt to keep doing the same things again and again and again, when perhaps we should rethink about what we actually need to accept, what is beyond my power, and work with what I can do. But the second part, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, sounds very Buddhist, but what it does, it helps us to just keep focused on my feet. We tend to look ahead too much, and perhaps we feel overwhelmed by what's going on around us, and we can start feeling overwhelmed. So if I can just focus one moment at a time, it helps to keep things in perspective. So yes, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, that life can be hard. Life is suffering at times, and we have to find ways to work with that to get to a sense of peace or satisfaction. And taking the world as it is, not as I would have it. Very interesting, taking the world as it is. We often like to have the world the way we want it, which you could say is perfectly understandable. We're human, we want things to run our way. But the truth is, life intrudes all the time. And so the way we respond to that helps us to deal with that uncertainty. And next one, please, Ellie. And this is a quote from Epictetus. I won't read it all, but it says much the same thing. Epictetus was a Roman 2nd century Stoic philosopher. And if nothing else, what the COVID-19 taught us was the age of the Stoics. I'll speak a bit more about that in a minute. So make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. Some things are up to us and some things are not up to us. Very similar to the Serenity Prayer, but this is much older. Next slide, please. So, yeah, common advice for dealing with uncertainty. I think if you Googled uncertainty and how to deal with it, you get a long list of different things and lots of videos. So what I've done here, I've just put together what I think the most common things that have been said about how to deal with it, not in any particular order. But the first one, what does the situation say about me and my beliefs? Do I need to challenge or reframe them? And important question here, because if we see uncertainty as a teacher, then we can use it to reflect upon what we are experiencing. And again, we're back to the Serenity Prayer. Do I need to change what my position is or my belief is, or accept the situation I find myself in? We often struggle with that again. We don't like to change, really. We actually like things to be stable. We like to be in control. But if we work with it, then perhaps we can work through it. The other Don't worry about things you cannot control. Again, that's the serenity prayer. And again, another hard thing to do. All this sounds easy, but actually it can be quite difficult because, again, we don't like change. But what can I not control and what can I control? Prepare for the worst, hope and work for the best. Me being the old engineer, I like to have options. If I can cope with the worst situation, that's fine. So it's always good to have different options that you can deal with if possible. Put things in perspective. We tend to catastrophize and globalize when shit hits the fan, pardon the French. So by putting it in perspective, it helps again to contain it more, so perhaps I can manage it better. So time out to reflect on what's going on for me. How bad is it really at this point in time? I mean, it could be terrible, of course, but it may not be as bad as I think. All this helps to keep it contained, so it gives me perhaps I can regain a sense of control over the situation. The other's the obvious one: exercise, eat well, sleep well, meditation, but they often go out the window when we're feeling pretty stressed. But it's always a good reminder to go back to those things if we can, because they can help us ground ourselves and give us some clarity. The Stoic way, it's right, the Stoics seem to know how to deal with uncertainty. Similar to the Serenity Prayer, but working with where you're at, understanding what's this telling me about myself, and then what can I do with the situation? And don't try to, try to reclaim what you can't get. And again, we often struggle with that. Learning the wisdom to accept the difference is really a good lesson if we can learn that lesson. And the other one, which should be the last one, is to be kind to yourself, because we can also be very critical of ourselves if we're not coping. We don't always have to cope. We're allowed to fail. Again, if you use it as an opportunity to learn and grow through the situation, then it's a benefit and value to us. But above all, be kind. Next slide. And the last one here is just a set of resources, which are books that I've read personally. You probably see most of these are Stoics, because again, they seem to really have the inside running on how to deal with uncertainty. And there's a list of also different videos, which I think, Ellie, we will be sending this stuff through to the people, or?
Yeah, that's right. At the end of the presentation, we'll send the slides around to everyone. So if you're interested in finding a bit more about any of this, you're welcome to. Okay.
So look, that's just a snapshot. It's a big topic. I'm happy to answer any other questions later once the other two people have finished their presentation. So, okay, thank you.
Jeff, that was great. If anyone has any sort of burning questions about Jeff's presentation, wants any big existential questions asked, here's your guy. Please feel free to type them in the chat while they're fresh in your mind. And I'll be passing on to Julie now for her presentation.
Cool. So I guess because now we know as adults how we might deal with an uncertainty from Geoff and various ways we can, then, you know, it kind of makes it really hard when we've got young kids running around. You know, maybe you were locked in COVID and you were trying to homeschool, you were trying to help your child feel certain, you were trying to feel certain too. And then what do? So here I am to tell you what you can do. So next slide, please. So young children, we kind of, I guess in some ways we might just assume that they might not necessarily know what's going on in the world. We kind of assume that the whole world is, for them, is just going to school, making friends, playing, and so forth and so forth. But actually research suggests that, and actually I've seen it myself, where kids actually are very aware of things that are uncertain to them. So you might find that they might try to ask for help, but they might not know how to deal with it yet. So you, for example, you might have a young child who's going to school and then all of a sudden they fall sick. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, but I don't want to go to, like, I'm sick, I want to go to school. And you might be like, oh, but you know, you're sick, you've got to stay home. And so that uncertainty of not being able to go to school, see their friends, play around because they're sick, makes it really difficult for them. But as parents, we're there to, you know, just sort of remind our children that it'll be okay. You need to stay home and you need to rest and you can go to school the next day. But I guess that just shows us that children can be uncertain too, except they just show it in different ways than we might typically sort of respond as adults. And it's important to know that neurodivergent children are particularly vulnerable to uncertainty as well, because you might find that children with, say, for instance, autism or ADHD, for example, tend to live in routines and like that sort of knowingness. And so they need those routines to feel settled and safe. But then if there is uncertainty in their lives as well, then they might find themselves, with more increased anxiety as well. So it's important to remember that too. The next slide, please. So it's also important to remember as well is that, we've got to teach our children to be okay and comfortable with uncertainty, because like Geoff said, it's a given. It's probably the only certain thing in life that you're going to have change and you're going to have uncertainty. So we've got to try and support our children to actually build a tolerance up. And, if we don't support our children to feel certain or in uncertain situations, then you might find that they might, be more anxious or depressed later in life. So it all starts with how we might want to support our children to be able to support themselves when they're an adult. Next slide, please, Ellie. So how do we figure out if your child is uncertain? In actual fact, a lot of the ways that children might respond to situations that make them feel uncertain might be the same way you as a parent might respond as well. So children might physiologically, they might hit things, they might throw things, they might break their toys, they might, cry and scream if things are uncertain for them. They might withdraw, they might, feel scared. They might ask you lots of questions. What are we doing tomorrow? What are we doing tomorrow? All the time. And you might say, oh, it's okay. Tomorrow will be okay. But they might keep asking. They might avoid situations. They might not follow what you're saying. You might ask them to get changed because you've got to get them to the appointment, but they're not wanting to get changed. They don't know what this appointment's about. They don't know what's going on. So they end up just avoiding it. Next slide, please, Ellie. But then, just like what I just mentioned with children, adults actually do the same thing. So instead of, the tantrums and the meltdowns and, throwing things and breaking things, as adults, we might actually find it hard to breathe. We might feel more tense. We might still throw things and, break things, but maybe not our toys. We might, might not necessarily say I'm scared, but we might actually worry a lot. We might sort of ponder and think about things over and over again. We might obsessively think about it to the point that we're trying to figure out, how do I feel safe and feel certain in this really uncomfortable situation? We might also avoid things like children do. We might put off that assignment. We might not respond to that text. We might just basically procrastinate because it's too uncertain and too confronting to deal with what's going on in front of us. So we do things that are easier. So next slide. So then after knowing all this, we're like, how do I deal with this now? Because Julie, you've told me what my kids might do. You told me what I might do. So how do I manage it? So in actual fact, it's actually okay for all of us to be uncertain because, it's a fact of life. We have to deal with it and we have to be okay with that uncomfortable feeling. But we can also support our children to feel the same. We can normalize and validate how they're responding. We might say to them, for instance, it's okay. Like, it's okay that you're scared that you're not able to go to school because you're sick, because you want to see your friends and you want to play with them, but you're sick at the moment. And so once you're feeling better, you can go back. We might want to model that to them because children pick up a lot of their responses from parents and adults and people around them. So talking to them about what's going on, helping them recognize and manage their emotions. So an example could be, when COVID was happening, a lot of children might have been like, Mum, Dad, why am I not going to school? And maybe parents might have said, oh, we're in lockdown. The government said we're in lockdown, there's COVID. But to them, they don't know what COVID is. They can't see it. So that's why it's important to explain to them that there was a virus going around that was making everyone sick, and it's safe to, keep away and make sure everyone's protected until the virus goes away. That's just an example, of course. Next slide, please. It's also important to try and get a sense of control too, because in uncertainty, we're always looking for, how do I sort of feel okay? It's very chaotic. The best way to try and manage that is actually gaining a sense of control. That could be, maintaining your routines. It could be as simple as eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner around the same time that you usually do. It could be waking up around the same time. It could be exercising around the same time. Those daily things that you would do just maintaining that can help you feel that sense of control. You know, allowing yourself to make choices and children to make choices. For instance, if a child is unsure what they want to eat, you could always ask them, would you like a banana? Would you like an orange? And make them allowed to have that choice so that they're not uncertain with, you know, the possibility of not being able to make a choice at all. It's important to focus on what your child is feeling and not trying to pathologize it. I've had a lot of experience with, you know, parents wondering themselves, are their child experiencing a lot of anxiety? Are they depressed? Are they, you know, do they have ADHD? Are they autistic? They're wanting to get a diagnosis when in actual fact, perhaps the child is feeling really overwhelmed and scared and really, you know, anxious, or maybe just really uncertain with what's going on. And perhaps it might not necessarily be a diagnosis, but maybe just how the child is responding to it. And the last point is to make sure you're supported too. You know, when you have children that are really young, it's, you know, of course, you're going to be looking after them and your whole world is them. But it's also important to make sure you're doing all right, and, you know, getting the support that you need, whether that's, you know, seeking a psychologist or even just speaking to your friends and family at, you know, bad English. I'm trying to say, whatever you might need help with, it's always important to try and, you know, ask for help. And what's the next slide? Cool. Here are some like resources, just some YouTube videos. And I love the third one, how to raise emotionally intelligent children, because I'm pretty sure that's a TED talk. And it just goes through about, you know, building emotional intelligence in children. And emotional intelligence is important, especially when you're dealing with uncertainty as well, because those emotions really help you cope during uncertain times. Cool.
Thanks, Julie. That was great. So if anyone has any questions about what Julie's been speaking about, if you've got young kids and just wanting some strategies, she's the person to ask. We can pop those questions in the chat, or we can chat at the question and answer time. And now I think it's time to pass on to Brittany. You ready?
Okay, hi everyone. So I'll be talking to you today about managing uncertainty for teens and adolescents. Okay, so the next slide, just got a few topics there that we'll be kind of covering briefly. So first slide, what sort of things do teenagers and adolescents face in this uncertain world? Well, many things. We have a lot of uncertainty about safety and well-being. I mean, all of them, I suppose. We live in a world where there's we're always being challenged by fear of danger, disease, and death. And of course, young people are going to be picking up on this stress and maybe internalizing that a little bit. There's a lot of uncertainty about future expectations, because really there's a big struggle to visualize what a young person's future is going to look like. You've probably heard them say, these are meant to be the best years of my life. And that's because a lot of these narratives, they haven't really taken into account the pandemic, the environment, the economy that we're going to be facing in the next few years. There's a lot of uncertainty about identity. So interestingly, there's a lot of developmental theories about the ages 13 to 21, where young people at this age, they're developing a personality, and one that is separate from the parents. It's so important for them to develop new friendships and relationships outside of the household. And if they don't really make this split clearly enough, they can struggle with self-confidence and really gaining an independent sense of self. Unfortunately, this is going to be challenged by lockdown requirements at times. There's a bit of uncertainty about loss. There are so many experiences that young people have missed out on around, such things like graduation, starting the new school year. And we don't really know how to recognize this loss and how that it can be resolved. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yep. So what are the challenges facing you, the parents, in communicating with young people through these uncertain times? Well, there's a lot of just overall difficulty I've laid out here. So teens do like to communicate in extremes, life is bad, no one understands, you've ruined my life. And it can be really hard not to respond back with that intensity, like your own hurt, your own anger, or maybe be dismissive of what they're saying. As well as that, like I said, there is that separation from family, which can be really hard when you are living under the same roof. But also teens do need to practice exercising control over their life and their environment, which can sort of clash with the parents' ideas of, what's right, what's wrong. And additionally, also considering government mandates that really takes away that control and choice. It can also be made even more difficult by the fact that it's such a time of impulsivity, that we don't really understand the consequences of actions at this age. Additionally, I guess adolescents and teens, they do have a hard time understanding and regulating their own emotions. This is especially difficult when they struggle to see past current pain and towards like a future for themselves without pain and sadness. Next slide. Interestingly enough, there is some research showing that adolescents and teens are actually a little bit better at handling uncertainty than adults. That's in part due to maybe more of a difficulty visualizing a future. So like they can handle a little bit more uncertainty now. However, some people, some teens and adolescents struggle a bit with the difficult emotions that are caused by uncertainty. And this is a real risk factor for depression and anxiety in a group that is already at a higher risk of anxiety and depression. So the question is, what signs are there that your adolescent or teenager might be at risk or need some help? So the next slide, we've got some warning signs for low mood. There's a bit of like a flattening of the mood. Usually teens have really high, like highs and lows, but if you're noticing that there's less variation and it's like a bit more depressive in the mood variation, that is a warning sign. You might start to hear them verbalizing thoughts about hopelessness and worthlessness, like, oh, everything's hopeless. I'm not very good at anything, about themselves. There's a loss of enjoyment in the activities that they may usually really like. You might notice some social withdrawal where they're less engaged with other people. You might start to hear them talking like about death and questioning life, which can be a bit shocking, I think, to a lot of parents who might be really worried about their kids' well-being. Like, what could this mean? You'll notice a bit of negativity, like they will struggle to hold on to positives and sort of criticize themselves a bit. Yeah. Next slide. So the real warning signs for depression, you'll notice the changes have been sustained for maybe 2 weeks or longer in different environments. Maybe not all environments, maybe they're still a bit happy around their friends. You'll notice a low energy, lack of self-care, like they might stop showering or eating, more angry outbursts at home or at school, getting into trouble at school, being less engaged with life, and really just be watching out for significant changes in behavior or mood that is outside the norm of what you'd usually expect from these young people that you know quite well. Next slide. So anxiety, I do hear from parents all the time, anxiety is normal. And yes, some anxiety is normal. It is our body's like warning system. However, it becomes a problem when it does start to paralyze young people from what they want to be doing with their life, like preventing them from, achieving their goals and, living. Consider anxiety to be an overestimation of danger or threat, in conjunction with underestimating their own ability to cope. Next slide. These are some warning signs of anxiety. They may very directly say, I am anxious, very plain English. You may notice that they're seeming a bit more on edge or touchy. You might notice catastrophizing or reassurance seeking, that is relying on you to help them reassure themselves and struggling to do that for themselves. You might notice withdrawing into themselves, maybe not putting themselves out there much at all. Avoidant behavior, avoiding school, avoiding friends, avoiding going out at all. They might get quite aggressive towards you or other people. Or there might just be emotional outbursts like, actual panic attacks, anger, crying, and that sort of thing. Okay, the next slide is how to talk to your young people if you do notice that you might be a bit worried about their mental health and how to start that conversation. Those are a few good rules to consider. Firstly, make sure that it is a time when you're both very calm. Frame the communication more about what you've noticed rather than what they are doing or what you think is wrong with them. So say, I've noticed that maybe you haven't been seeing your friends as much, and really have a conversation with the goal of listening and fully understanding your teen's perspective on the issue instead of, giving advice or going in with problem solving right away. So, collaborate together on the problem, offer solutions as ideas, and maybe seeking therapy can be one of those ideas. Okay, so the next slide, just some basic tips on how to be there in general for your young person during these times of uncertainty. Really, I hear it all the time from clients, do keep talking to your kids. Take an interest in their life, stay involved. Let them know that you are on their side. Listen and empathize without problem solving or comparison, or worse yet, criticizing them. Acknowledge their feelings and ask how you can help. And also very important, focus on remaining calm. And when you are calm, you will feel more in control. If you do feel yourself becoming frustrated, you're allowed to take a moment, like maybe 20 minutes or so. Do communicate about that is very important. Make sure that you do pick things up again later. Don't just drop it. Keep making yourself available for them, like one-on-one. Even if they knock you back, at least they'll know that you are there. Spend time as a family, but don't nag them about spending time as a family. Like, make time for shared exercise and activities that you think they'll enjoy. Respect your teens' need for privacy and their need for time apart, as well as the need to have control over their environment. Support their connection with other people, and that does involve understanding the significance of, devices and mobile phones in helping keeping them connected. And, lastly, you're allowed to not have all the answers. You're allowed to make mistakes. Just please communicate about this to your teens and adolescents. Okay, the next slide, that's just some more information. There's a 50-minute seminar there about parenting teens in times of uncertainty. I recommend listening to the whole thing if you want some more information. Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Brittany. That was good, some really good practical tips in there. If you've got any questions relating to Brittany's segment, you can type them in the chat now, or we're almost at the question and answer portion anyway, so you can hold up. So that concludes the more formal segment of the webinar this evening. We'll dedicate the rest of the time to answer any questions relating to the content or to the topic of uncertainty. So you're welcome to type your questions in the chat. You can unmute yourself and ask a question if you're comfortable. And we also had some questions that participants sent in when they registered for the webinar. So I'll make sure that they're touched on as well. It probably goes without saying, but just a reminder to be respectful and polite to other participants and to our team. And we want everyone to feel safe to share and discuss. And also just a reminder that we can't answer any specific questions about you or your child. So just try to keep your questions a little bit more general. Yes, I now open to you. Or I can also kick us off with one of the pre-registered questions, if that's easier. So we had one question about managing stress and anxiety when starting high school. That's probably best directed towards you, Brittany, if you're happy to
ready to go
on that. Yeah.
Okay, so back to some of the things in the slide, firstly, talking to the adolescent or teenager. If you're starting high school, adolescent, I'm guessing, really get an understanding of what their specific worries are. Could it be adjusting to the new campus? Is it managing an increased workload, friendship problems, or something maybe a little bit more serious, like Are they at risk of school refusal, or is it an actual diagnosable anxiety kind of issue? Really consider the support that is already offered through the school so that they have more people and places that they can go to feel safe. Services that schools do have available, youth groups, extracurricular programs, it can really help them make friends and gain a bit more confidence and challenge some of these anxieties in a way that's actually, not just straight into the deep end. Consider tutoring or mentoring programs if it's more of an academic worry. Learn, of course, how to access the school's wellbeing team and where they can go during the day if things are a bit too overwhelming. Some schools are great and have places like safe classrooms and safe places, safe teachers that they can go to during the day when they do have a problem or they are feeling very stressed or anxious. Then accessing other services, like if it is school refusal, maybe attending some classes but not all of them, or working out what's a program that's going to work for them in terms of accessing special consideration or getting extensions. If the school doesn't have these sorts of programs and the anxiety is quite severe, you can at some point consider if the school is a good match. I know that seems a bit extreme, but there are some very supportive environments for things that are a little bit more, severe. And, I guess in the family, creating some stability through routine, accepting that the problem is there and that's something that we can work with, and really do remain involved in your young person's life. Yeah. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, there were some really good tips in there, lots of them. So hopefully whoever asked that question is happy with those answers, and feel free to add in if there's anything you'd like to ask a bit more about. We've had one come through in the chat. Is there a risk to stereotype anxiety and depression and name everything with these names? I know this is something you're quite passionate about, Julie. Would you like to answer that one? Or anyone's welcome to chime in.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. There is a bit of a risk. I think a lot of people these days are just throwing out, oh, I'm anxious, I've got depression, I've got this and those things. And, we've got what us psychologists use to be able to diagnose people with this. But I think it's important to remember that all of us can feel anxious at any stage, and all of us can feel depressed at any stage. We might have a family member pass away, and for a moment we would feel really depressed and sad that the person we loved has passed on. We might have moments of anxiety as well where, we might not know what's happening next with our work or with our children or whichever, and we're going to have those moments. So I think it's important to remember that they're going to come. But, it's also important that if you feel like you might be having clinical depression or clinical anxiety, it's important to see a psychologist or your GP about it so you can discuss it further. And also to remember that if your anxiety or any sort of depressive symptoms you may be experiencing is having an impact on not only your work, your life, your friendships, your relationships, then perhaps it might be worth seeking some support to get that help. But yeah, I think people need to maybe not throw it around so easily either. So, because, we all feel it.
Yeah, we all have these.
Problem is sorry, Ellie. The problem is the words are large catchphrase words. So it's important to try to understand what the depression, anxiety means to each person. What is this telling me about myself and my situation? It's through our experience. If we just say I've got depression, well, what does that mean? It's a word. So everybody's depression is unique. So, the problem is we throw it around, we don't really understand what's going on. It's important to ask the question, what am I feeling? What is my depression telling me? Okay, talk to it. Some of it may be normal. We all get depressed. We all get anxious. Okay, we don't want to pathologize something that may not need to be pathologized. So first of all, find out, is a situation, am I stressed because it's a stressful situation? So I'm feeling anxious because it's just a shit situation. Then okay, what do I do about it? Of course. But we do tend to throw these things around as if it's, we're all pathologized, and that takes down other roads. So But always ask, what's happening to me right now? What is this telling me? As I said earlier, what does it tell me about my own belief systems? Okay, perhaps they're not working. Perhaps I'm expecting something that's just not going to work, and I need to do something about my expectations about how my life should be or how the situation should be. Okay, before we go down the road of even seeing us as psychologists, just saying. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Julie and Geoff. That was a really interesting question. Have you got something to add, Brittany, as well?
Yeah, I think I should probably
go for it.
mention
Everyone,
that.
we've got the full hat.
Yeah, so sometimes just a little thing to sort of add, if a young person is very confused about why they might be feeling this way, sometimes having the label can be a little bit more sort of, it can be a bit empowering to sort of have an understanding of what they're actually going through, and then help guide them into seeking treatment, or even understanding why it is that they are experiencing certain symptoms, for example, like social anxiety. What is something that maybe can be normalized a little bit? Like, is it something that other people do go through? Is it something where there are ways forward? And of course, I don't sort of advocate for like a strict, like pure, like medical model. Let's get the diagnosis, let's get medication into them. I do think for some, a label can be useful in creating a sense of understanding of something that they may not really have the words for. Yeah. So just considering that as well. Of course, sometimes I think there is the fear that it might become something that, is a way of like giving up. But I certainly try not to do that with my clients specifically.
Yeah, thanks, Brittany. It's great to get everyone's perspective on that. It's really got us thinking and talking, which is good. So I suppose it's labels can be useful and important, but also it's important not to pathologize everything and to kind of normalize different reactions. That's kind of the general gist that I'm getting from everyone. We've had another question come through. This is probably a good one for you, Julie. It's about children's behaviour. How early do the signs of depression and anxiety usually show in children?
Like what age, or?
I suppose, yeah, at what age or when might you be able to pick that up?
You might pick it up when, just like adults, when we might not want to do things we usually do. So they might play with a certain friend for a while. Then all of a sudden they stopped. And then all of a sudden you might see your child maybe not as happy and playful anymore. And so generally there might be the early signs that maybe something's going on. And that's a good time to just be asking, oh, what's happening? What happened with you and your friend? Or what happened? Like, what you look like you're feeling sad. Like, are you feeling okay? And sort of just trying to understand. A lot of the early warning signs that we might notice in children are quite, very similar to adults and very, plainly seen to be picked up. Might not be eating as much, might not be as playful. They might ask a lot of questions like, where are we going? What time are we getting there? When will we be back? Generally questions that they might not have asked before. So they could be early warning signs that you could pick up on, and it's a good time to maybe just have a conversation about what might be happening for them.
Thanks, Julie. That's great. We've got another one just come through as well. So now that we've experienced great uncertainty of COVID over the past few years, how do we transition back to pre-COVID and rewire ourselves to not over-predict and anticipate future uncertainties? Geoff, I'm looking at you. This sounds like it could be a you question. What do you think? Or anyone else, feel free to chime in.
Funny thing is, and certainly, like I said earlier, it's always been with us. This is not new. It's just that we've lived in an age of certainty and control so well, we've just lost the art of dealing with ambiguity. So we need to have it in our lives. We need to understand it comes. And so that way we can be more prepared to respond to uncertainty. We can't eradicate it like anxiety and depression, but we can learn to work with and be with these things. So, start checking your responses and your resiliences and questioning how you believe the world should be and how you should be. And it's always good to reflect on how we are, because we're constantly, the world comes at us. It's an old Buddhist saying, life as it is the only teacher. Okay. So everything is an opportunity to learn and grow if we see it that way. But of course, if we feel if it's challenging our sense of self, we feel threatened by that. Naturally, we do. But if we take stock and have perspective on this again, we can perhaps lean forward into this and work with it. Okay. I mean, you could argue one of the greatest uncertainties is death, though that's probably a certainty, isn't it? We're all going to die. So there are some things we can't get around, of course, you know, like we're going to die unless you believe in an afterlife. But I think it's taught us that we just can't always assume things will carry on. It's like, I call it the white line fever. If we're driving down the road, you know, you're on your side, I'm on my side. I have faith that you will stay on your side, right? But the truth is the car could come across at me anytime, okay? And I have no control over that, except I could avoid it possibly. But we have an act of faith in everything we do. We assume everything will work. Now, the sad thing is we need to accept that, because if we think, you know, the person who's scared of flying is actually the sensible one, okay? Because they're giving away their lives to someone at the front of the plane who might decide to crash it into a hill. So really, to be anxious about that is actually perfectly normal. So we need to forget about that and enjoy our food and watch our movies and just pretend everything is fine. Freud once said that trauma and uncertainty is seeing into the void. Okay, when something happens to us and we fear we may die, we see into the void. He says we can't cope with that. So he said we have to suture the wound back, the veil back of uncertainty back to certainty, because it's too much for us. So we have to acknowledge it exists, but then forget about that it exists. That's the duality, that's the tension between these things. That's probably how we best prepare.
Really interesting. Thanks, Geoff. We've got another one come through. So wondering if it's a risk that teenagers are more influenced by their practitioner or their psychologist rather than their parents. Is that sort of a risk with that relationship? Potentially, Brittany, you could talk to that?
So not really wanting to go too much into the specifics of that, because I do think that's something that can be followed up between the parent and the practitioner. Like I did mention in the slides, it is important, I think, for young people to start to develop relationships outside of, I guess the family. And sometimes when we think about therapy, and especially for young people, it can be quite challenging, I think, to understand the necessity of privacy, I think, around the contents of that therapy. Of course, like when I work myself, I am kind of encouraging the young people to share. But sometimes I think it can be a bit of a struggle with parents in dealing with, in a way, uncertainty, because they're not sure of the specifics of what is being said during those sessions. In terms of influence, of course, psychologists in Australia, we are governed by like ethics and supervision. It's not a case maybe where that's so much a risk factor. I'm not really sure what that particularly indicates. Or maybe there is a tendency for parents to be a bit afraid of like what that could mean with the uncertainty, I guess. Maybe does anybody else, maybe Julie or Geoff, have something that they might be able to share on that?
Yeah, I think working with teens, I work with them as well, and I can understand as a parent how a teen could come in and see myself or Brittany and start telling them a lot of things about their lives. It could be their friendships, it could be things at school, it could be things at home, and it can be a bit scary not knowing what are they talking about, what can I help with, and every parent wants to be able to help their child and their teenager. So my approach is the same as Brittany's, and it's always encouraging the young person to speak with their parent. I've had some young people have said to me that sometimes I don't feel comfortable because of various reasons and so forth. And, it's supporting parents as well to listen to what the young person's trying to say too. And whilst you might not be in the room with us while we're talking, just know that we're reminding teens to talk to their parents and share whatever they're sharing with us just to their parents. And so it's not just with us. So that's always on the forefront of my mind as well.
Thanks, Tim. So we probably need to start wrapping up now.
Tara had a.
Oh, did I miss one?
Yeah, if we have time for a quick one, I mean, if not, no trouble.
Yeah, no, but I think one last question should be okay.
I suppose in relation to what you guys have been talking about, and thank you, by the way, this has been fantastic, sharing this knowledge, really appreciated. I suppose when it comes to younger, newly speaking toddlers to younger children, I mean, when we're feeling that uncertainty and they absorb things so quickly, you know, what can you guys suggest? Because you don't want to deny your own reactions, yet you're responsible to guide the reactions of this little pure vessel, I suppose. You know, how do you navigate that? What would you guys suggest in times like this for someone so young and so fresh to the human experience?
I guess I'll answer that one since I work with some toddlers. Yeah, look, it's really hard, and you know, you can't be perfect. No one can. And so there are going to be days where your toddler's crying, you're trying to cry too, everyone's crying. What are you going to do? So then it's just important to remember, okay, what do I want to do first? And generally you will always want to look after your child first. So try and settle your child first, and you know, what that looks like, whether that's giving them a cuddle, whether it's giving them some food, whether it's trying to, you know, help soothe them pretty much. Once they're soothed and once they're feeling a bit calmer, that's when you can start looking after yourself, whether that's, you know, self-care. That could be as simple as crying on the phone to a friend for a little bit and saying, oh my gosh, I've just had an awful time with my toddler and blah, blah, blah. Whether it's, you know, reading a book or putting a candle on and putting music on when your baby's settled, or, you know, and then that way you've got more energy to then look after your child next time they might be uncertain or crying again, because you're looking after yourself in the moments when they are feeling a bit settled as well.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
There's an old child psychiatrist, Winnicott, in the 50s, I think, who talked about the good enough parent. You just have to be good enough. You don't have to be the best. And it's hard when you're all stressed. And of course, the kids feed on that. Of course they do. They're sponges. I think what Julie said is good advice. Yes, of course, you try to find ways to help yourself. Your calm will help your child, but you're human. So, you know, we don't always get it right. And that's okay too. All right.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. What a great last question to end on. I will share my screen now just quickly. I say quickly, but it's not happening that quickly. So just to wrap up today, I might go around to the psychologist just for their quick key takeaway from today's session, just a sentence or two, just to conclude things. Should I start with you, Geoff?
Try to see what's going on inside you when you're feeling uncertain. I think that's the key. And try to differentiate between what needs to change and what we need to accept. I think that's a universal guide that you can use throughout life. The Serenity Prayer I keep coming back to, it's a beautiful prayer, and it's probably encapsulates everything about uncertainty. Get yourself a copy.
Will do. What about you, Brittany? Oh, I think you're just on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, I guess like, you know, uncertainty, that is something that, you know, your teens are going through as well as you. I guess the importance of really listening and empathizing with your teens during this time, even when that can be quite challenging, sort of decoding what it is that they're really saying. Yeah, I guess being there for them during that time, as well as, you know, showing up for yourself as well. And, you know, there are not a lot of answers, I suppose, in working with you know, big parenting teams sometimes, and really just owning that and being genuine with them about that specifically. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Brittany. And Julie, what about you? What's your key takeaway?
I guess it's just, you know, the more we learn about ourselves, whether we're a person with children, whether a person that don't have children at the moment. I think it's important to just recognize what might be going on for you, like Geoff said, because that's going to be able to guide you and support you with your children, because children, like Geoff said, are sponges. They learn off everything that you're showing them and teaching them. And, you know, recognizing if you might be having difficulty coping with uncertainty, your child might be experiencing the same because they're learning off you. So the more we sort of try and, you know, cope and learn to live with that uncertainty, your children will do the same.
Thanks so much. So I'd like to thank our team of psychologists, Geoff, Julie and Brittany, for your presentations. I'd also like to thank everyone for coming tonight and for being a part of this webinar. We really appreciate your contributions, and hopefully you've all left with some new ideas or strategies that you can implement in your lives. We will email you all the presentation slides if you're interested in accessing any of those resources. And we'll also be launching some online resources on our website, just with a bit more information if you're interested. So I'll email you around a feedback form. We'd love to hear from you. And if you need any additional support, I've got some hotline numbers up here. And there's also our details if you're interested in booking an appointment or making an inquiry. So that concludes the webinar today. Thank you very much.